How you doing there today? We're studying Daf Pei Vav, Daf 86 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, Daf Pei Vav is a cool daf. It shouldn't be too difficult. We're going to learn two Mishnayos on Daf Pei Vav. The first one talks about Shechita of a Cheresh, Shoteh, V'Ka'in. They, of course, as we know, do not have das. They don't have intent. So the question is, how much do we have to be concerned about the Shechita of a Cheresh, Shoteh, V'Ka'in? Do we just assume that it's bad and that it's nevela? Or do we have to be concerned that maybe there's a possibility that it's a kosher shechita? And what are the nafkaminas in terms of Kisui Hadam, in terms of oafs bino? And the second Mishnah we discussed, Shechting multiple chayas and multiple oafs at once in terms of brachas and Kisui Hadam. Well, initially Kisui Hadam, how many times do you have to do Kisui Hadam for a number of animals and birds? And then at the end, we get into an interesting question about making brachas and making new brachas. So, friends, this is what we have in store for Daf Pei Vav of Masechta Chullin. I hope you will enjoy. Come, join me. Let's have a great time studying Daf Pei Vav of Masechta Chullin. We begin on Daf Pei Vav Amid Aleph, around halfway or so, honestly, through Daf Pei Vav Amid Aleph at the Mishnah. Cheresh, I'll tell you, friends, I'm in a little bit of a rush. I got to, it's Friday afternoon, and we're going away for Shabbos. So I need to be on the move a little bit. Says the Mishnah, Cheresh V'Ka'in, a deaf and dumb person, that's what a Cheresh is, a Shoteh, I guess just a dumb person, a foolish person, someone without intellect. V'Ka'in, or a minor, who is considered that none of these people have das. They don't have any level of intention and what's the thing? Intention. Yeah, I think that's probably what I'm thinking of. Shechatu, that they shechted. V'acherim ro and osam. Oh, and others are guarding them. Wow, it's throwback to the first Mishnah of Masechta Chullin. What does it say in the first Mishnah of Masechta Chullin? Hakol shochatin. This is the first Mishnah of Masechta Chullin. Remember Masechta Zvachim? All the time we kept on flipping back to the first Mishnah of Masechta Zvachim. Anyways, I think even throughout Menachos even as well. Anyways, Hakol shochatin v'shchitasin ksher chutz micher shoteh v'ka'in shemikakul shchitasin v'chulin sheshachtu v'acherim roy and osin shchitasin ksher. That even if you have a cher shoteh v'ka'in, but other people are observed, it's a big shaila of what v'chulin is talking about. But anyways, if you have other people observing the shechita, the cher shoteh v'ka'in, and they could sign off on it and say it was taka kosher shechita, so then it's a kosher shechita. So again, cher shoteh v'ka'in sheshachtu, that they shechted, v'acherim roy and osim, and other people are observing and they could sign off on the shechita that it's kosher. Chayev lechasos. So Rashi says those who are observing are chayev to do a Kisui Hadam on the shechita of the Cheresh Shoteh V'Ka'in. Beinon levein atzman. However, if the Cheresh Shoteh V'Ka'in are slaughtering alone, and there's nobody to sign off on the shechita, well then, poter mi lechasos. There is no chiyuv for Kisui Hadam, because we assume that it was the Cheresh Shoteh V'Ka'in would have shechted non-kosherly, and therefore there's no requirement for Kisui Hadam. V'chein the inyan oafs bino. And similarly, when it comes to oafs bino, sheshachtu v'acherim ro and osan, also the shchot achreim, that if they shecht and there are people observing them who can sign off on the kosherness of the shechita, so then there is a concern about oafs bino. If that was the mother, you cannot shecht the daughter. Beino levein atzmon, but if they shechted alone, well then Reb Meir mati the shchot achrein. Reb Meir says that there is no concern for oafs bino, because the assumption is that the shechita that they did alone on their own is nevela. It's a pasul shechita, and if it's a pasul shechita, there is no concern about oafs bino, and you can shecht the daughter. V'chachamim osim, but chachamim say Osir. The Chachamim say that when a Cheresh Shoteh V'Ka'in shechts a mother, so there is a concern for oafs bino, and you would not shecht the daughter that day, because there's a possibility that maybe it was a kosher shechita, and we have to be concerned for that possibility. But the Chachamim do agree, though, they do admit that if you did go ahead and shecht the daughter, there would be no chiyuv makas, because maximum it's a sofek hasra. Hasra is sofek, right? So if a cher shoteh v'kohen shechted the mother, so the chacham say don't shecht the daughter just in case there's a kosher shechita. However, it's a just in case, it's a maybe, and therefore, if you went ahead and the chacham said don't shecht the daughter, but if you did shecht the daughter and they warned you don't do it, there's not going to be any chiyuv makis, because maximum it's we don't actually know if the mother was shechted properly, and it's asra safek, right? To say, right, we can't say you're definitely chayiv makis. You may be chayiv makis. You're not going to be chayiv makis for a maybe. I'm going to chap a shluka tea, and we're going to go weiter. Says the Gemara, V'rabonon ma'ishna reisha de lo plige u'ma'ishna sefer de plige. Interesting. You know, the Chachamim in the Mishnah, they really come in the sefer, right? What do we say in the reisha? Let's read the reisha together. Okay, benon levein atzmon poter milichasos. That's it. The Mishnah says in the reisha, you have a cheresh v'kohen. If they shech by themselves, there's no need for kisei Hadam. It's a bad shechita. It's possible. No need for kisei Hadam there. And then we say v'chein le'inyan osav ezbeno, and the same halachas by osav ezbeno. Skip a little. Benon levein atzmon, if they're by themselves. Rav Meir matir lishchot achreim. Again, there's no concern that they did a kosher shechita, and just like you don't have to do kisei Hadam, there's no concern about osav ezbeno either. Now here, the Chachamim chime in, and they say, wait. You do need to be concerned that maybe it was a proper shechita, and therefore don't shech the daughter. Why did they not say in the reisha also that we do need to be concerned about a proper shechita, and therefore you should do kisui Hadam out of safek? Why not? Nochamol, says the Gemara, Rabbanon, Mashna reisha, delo plige, Mashna sefer de plige. How come they only argue when it comes to osav ezbeno, that they're concerned there was a kosher shechita? What about the reisha, kisui Hadam? Where am I? Umashna sefer de plige. Oh, so reisha, I'll tell you why. The reason why the Chacham don't say anything about the reisha, and therefore effectively are saying that you don't do kisui Hadam, it's because because if even though the Chachamim are concerned that maybe it was a kosher shechita, however, there is another concern. If we say do kisui Hadam out of safek, you know what's going to happen? There's going to be people who see this. They're going to be people they're going to see. People are curious people. They're going to see, oh wow, cheresh shoteh v'kohen just shechted. Oh wow, look, and they're doing kisui Hadam. Apparently, cheresh shoteh v'kohens do good shechitas, and because they do good shechitas, we have to do kisui Hadam, and people are going to eat the shechita of a cheresh shoteh v'kohen. If we say that you have to do kisui Hadam out of concern that maybe it's a kosher shechita, the people who see it, they're going to say, shechita ma'ayusay, clearly the shechita of the cheresh shoteh v'kohen was kosher, and that's why it requires kisui Hadam. And what this is going to lead to is that people are going to be eating the shechita of a cheresh shoteh v'kohen, and they don't want that. So in the reisha, they agree that you wouldn't do kisui Hadam for the shechita of a cheresh shoteh v'kohen. Frag the Gemara, but why do they say that we have to be concerned about osav ezbeno, and therefore by the shechita of a cheresh shoteh v'kohen of the mother, we don't shecht the child? Sefer nami kevin de ka'amrei rabbonon also lishchot achreim. Let's say the same thing in the sefer, that since the chachamim are saying no, you're not allowed to shecht the daughter, people are going to say, wait, why are you not allowed to shecht the daughter? What are we concerned about osav ezbeno? What was the shechita of the mother kosher shechita? The shechita of cheresh shoteh v'kohen was kosher. That's why we're not allowed to shecht the daughter. Why are we not concerned about that? Sefer nami kim de ka'amrei rabban, and since the rabbi is saying the sefer, also the shchot achreim, you're not allowed to shech the daughter. Why are you not allowed to shech the daughter? Memela, the shechita of the cheresh shoteh v'kohen of the mother was kosher. Shechita ma'ayisai, that the shechita of the mother was clearly a kosher shechita, and that's why you're not allowed to shech the daughter. V'aseh the meichum shechita, and again, shouldn't they have the same concern that that people are going to end up eating from the Shechita of a Cheresh, Shoteh, v'Kohen? Sefer Amrei Bisra Delo Ka Mi Boya Le. So the Gemara says, nah, not really. Kilu, when you see them going and doing Kisui Hadam, you can say, oh wow, clearly it was a kosher Shechita. But when after Shechta, the Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen shechs the mother, we refrain from shechting the daughter. I mean, there's nothing really to look at. People are going to say, oh, okay, I guess they're not hungry anymore. They're not going to draw conclusions about Osav as Beno necessarily. Reisha Nami Amir L'Nakir Chatzer U'Tzarich. Okay, but can't you say in the Reisha also by Kisui Hadam that they shechted in the Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen shechted in a Chatzer. Who wants to leave? You have to clean up the Chatzer. So it's not actually Kisui Hadam, because why would you have to do Kisui Hadam for Shechita of Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen? Maybe people will say, what they're doing is they're simply cleaning up the Chatzer. There's blood all over the Chatzer. Take some dirt, cover up the blood. Why don't we say that that's what people will conclude? The Gemara says, maybe people will conclude that in a Chatzer. So I went to a chicken, maybe a month and a half ago, so I went to a chicken Shechita. So that was talking in a Chatzer. Wow. What's a Babble on Talmud shir these days without a reference to chicken Shechita? Well, what can I tell you? Akoponim. So that was in a Chatzer. So that's all fine and good if it's in a Chatzer. But what if it's in a garbage heap? So if it's in a garbage heap, and the Chacham would say that you have to do Kisui Hadam, so people are going to see that and they're going to say, well, it's clearly not to clean the garbage heap. It must be because it was a kosher Shechita. So what if the Shechita took place in a garbage heap? But what if they go to Bezdin and they ask, sages of the Bezdin, what do we do? The Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen just shechted. Do we do Kisui Hadam or not? If the Rabbanan would say that the answer is yes, you do Kisui Hadam, well, people who observe that psak, well, they would conclude, wow, Bezdin even paskin that they have to do Kisui Hadam. Clearly, the Shechita of a Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen is kosher, and then they're going to eat the Shechita of a Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen. For the time, but 1 second, once already we're getting into that territory, that if we say that you have to do Kisui Hadam, we're concerned about what will happen if in Bezdin they say you have to do Kisui Hadam, people are going to say, okay, the Shechita of a Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen is kosher. Well, same thing. They say in the Seifa that we have to be concerned about Osav as Beno. That means that if you go to Bezdin and you say, Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen shechted the mother, can we shech the daughter? And based on the Chacham, based on the Shita of the Chacham, the Bezdin would have to say, no, you can't shech the daughter. Well, if that's the case, shouldn't we be concerned about the same conclusions? If people can say, oh no, you can't shech the daughter, wow, clearly the Shechita of a Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen was kosher. So Ela Rabbanan Akula Milsa Plige. Rather, you know what? We got it all wrong. We were assuming that since the rabbis only say their opinion at the end, by Osav as Beno, it means that they're only concerned about Osav as Beno. They're not concerned about Kisui Hadam. Guess what? Wrong. They argue on the whole Mishnah. Just like they say you have to be concerned about Osav as Beno by the Shechita of a Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen, you also have to be concerned about Kisui Hadam. And you would have to do Kisui Hadam out of Suffolk. V'natre le the Rab Meir ademasik le milsa v'other pligei love. They simply were very polite, teaching us derech eretz. Very polite so many times, especially now on social media and all that. All the political debates have nobody lets anybody talk. Everyone's just yelling louder and louder and louder. One person yells, the other person yells louder, the next person yells even louder. But the Rabbanan are saying, wait, let people finish, and then say what you got to say. So the rabbis waited till Reb Meir finished the Shechita, and that's when they said, you know what, we actually are concerned that maybe it's a kosher Shechita, and therefore the rabbis say, in the entire Mishnah, when it comes to Kisui Hadam, we're concerned for a kosher Shechita, you have to do Kisui Hadam at a suffix. When it comes to Osav as Beno, we're concerned for a kosher Shechita, don't check the daughter. Says the Gemara, Bishlam Rabbanon, the Chumre. Says the Rabbanon, I understand Shitas Rabbanon. I understand the Shita of the rabbis. They're being stringent. You have to do Kisui Adam out of Suffolk. Don't check the daughter out of Suffolk. El Reb Meir, my timer. Why is Reb Meir being lenient? Why be based on what is he being lenient over here? Omar Reb Yaakov Omar Reb Yechanan Michayvai Reb Meir al Shechitasim Mishum Nevela. I'll tell you why. So sure was Reb Meir that the Shechita of a Shoteh v'Kohen is not a kosher Shechita, and that it was Nevela if one ate the Shechita of a Shoteh v'Kohen. According to Reb Meir, that fellow would be liable to lashes. There's no suffix in the matter. It's certainly Nevela. The Shechita of a Shoteh v'Kohen is certainly Nevela. Since it's certainly Nevela, you'd be chayiv lashes for eating it. And since it's certainly Nevela, there's no chiyuv Kisui Adam, and there's no concern about also Vezmino. My timer, how come Reb Meir is so certain? Reb Ami says, Rabbi, Ho'il v'roiv ma'asein mikul kolim. The answer is, since most of the actions of the Shoteh v'Kohen, most of the Shechita of the Shoteh v'Kohen is going to be bad. There is a mere slight possibility that the Shechita of the Shoteh v'Kohen would be kosher. But all likelihood is that the Shechita of the Shoteh v'Kohen would be not kosher, and therefore we treat it as nevela. Now, there's a shaila between Rav Papa and Rav Huna ber Rav Yeshua. Unclear who asked who, but it's an amazing shaila. What do you think the shaila is? It's a beautiful shaila. My irya rov afilu miut nami. You hear the shaila? Chaver, what's Rav Meir's shita? What's Rav Meir's shita? There's a lot of shitas. One of them is choshesh in the miut. One of Rav Meir's shitas is that when you have a rov, a majority, and a miut, a minority, you have to be concerned for the minority. So the question is a beautiful question. Why is Rav Meir saying that he's so certain that it's nevela because rov of their shchitas are going to be nevela? Even if simply a miut of their shchita was nevela, Rav Meir would say choshesh in the miut, and we would consider it to be nevela. Again, my area rov. Why does Rav Meir have to say that we treat their shchita as nevela because rov of their shchitas are nevelas? I feel a miut nami, even a minority, even if it was just a minority of their shchitas are puzzle, we'd have to be concerned about nevela. So Rav Meir chayish lemiuta. Rav Meir is the Tana who's concerned about miuts, and therefore, if we say that even just a miut of Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen's shecht non-kosherly, smoch miuta l'chazaka ve'asrele ruba. Well, guess what? We have three things going on here. If Rav Meir were to simply say that a minority of Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen's mess up their shchitas, so we have that minority. The majority does kosher shchitas in this scenario. So even if we say that when it comes to Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen, the majority of Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen's actually do perform kosher shchitas. The minority messes up the shchita. But there's another thing we have here. We have rov, we have miut, and chazaka. What's the chazaka? The chazaka is an animal that is alive is not kosher as long as it's alive. Right, a sheep when it's alive, you can't eat it, save it min achai. So an animal, so long as it's alive, it has a chazaka, you can't eat it. It's alive, it's save it min achai. The way that you release that chazaka and you make the animal allowed and kosher to be eaten is through a proper shechita. Now, with regard to that shechita, we're saying when it comes to Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen, a miut is going to mess up the shechita, and a majority will do a kosher shechita, we're suggesting. So now we have the chazaka that the animal is not kosher because it's initially it's alive and it's ever min achai, and there's that chazaka of until we release that chazaka, until we override that chazaka with the kosher shechita, we have that chazaka that it's not allowed to be eaten because it's alive and it's ever min achai. So you have a chazaka that it's not allowed to be eaten, and now you shecht it. And even if we say just a minority of cheresh shoteh v'kohanim are going to mess up the shechita, and therefore do a partial shechita, so you have the fact that it had a chazaka of being asur to eat when it was alive because of ever min achai, plus the miut of cheresh shoteh v'kohanim that we're suggesting mess up shechitas. So you have a chazaka plus a miut against a rov of cheresh shoteh v'kohanim that would perform shechita kosherly. So you have a chazaka plus a miut against a rov. And that miut, when joined together with the chazaka, are going to weaken that rov. So again, the question is, my area rov, why does Reb Meir have to say that a majority of cheresh shoteh v'kohanim shecht unkosherly? I feel a miut, even if you say a minority of cheresh shoteh v'kohanim shecht unkosherly, still Reb Meir would consider it to be nevela. The Reb Meir chayish l'miuta, because Reb Meir is concerned about a miut, and if a miut of cheresh shoteh v'kohanim shecht unkosherly, so we have to be concerned about that. And smuch miuta l'chazaka, and when you join that miut of not kosher shechita of cheresh shoteh v'kohanim together with the chazaka that the animal when it's alive is not kosher because it's alive and it's ever min achai, the asrulei ruba, and that would weaken the rov if we say that a rov of cheresh shoteh v'kohanim do in fact do kosher shechitas. But it's that rov against a chazaka plus a miut. It's not, because after all, we learn in a Mishnah Masechta Tyrus, Tinok shenimtza b'tzara isa. If you have a dough, and the dough is a kosher dough. If you have a dough, and the dough is a kosher dough. Not just kosher, it's kosher dough, of course, but it's a tahor dough. It's a pure dough. It's a tahor dough. Great. So this dough has a chazaka, it's tahor. But now, what do you find? You walk into the kitchen, and guess who is holding in his hand a piece of dough? The cute little baby. The 2-year-old baby. The 2-year-old baby is holding a piece of dough. And he took that piece of dough from the dough. From the big dough, he took a piece in his hand. Now, okay, we said that the dough has a chazaka that it's tahor. Okay, what about this baby? So it's not tinok shenimtza b'tzad o isa. If you have this baby that is found next to this dough, uvatzek biyado, and he's holding dough in his hand, a piece of dough in his hand. Reb Meir Matayr. Reb Meir says that the dough is nonetheless tahor. Chacham say that the dough is tameh. How come? Because babies play around in garbage heaps. 2-year-old babies, they go and they crawl themselves over to the local waste management point, and they hang out with the nice gentlemen who work in waste management. And the babies, they like to hang out in the garbage heap and play around with the dead mice and the dead rats and the, all sorts of dead sheretzes. And then they come home all tameh from having been playing with their friends, the dead mice and the dead rats. And they come into the kitchen and they find the dough that their mother is making, and they take a piece of it. And they're tameh, and the metame the dough. So it's not tinuk shenimtza b'tzad isa. Let's say Reb Meir Matayr v'chol metam mipnei shdago shel tinuk l'tabeach. V'amina, we say my time with Reb Meir. Why does Reb Meir say that the dough is tahor? The answer is kasav rov tinokos metapchin umiut ein metapchin. Because yes, lots of babies go to the garbage heap and play with dead mice and dead rats, but some don't. Some don't do that. Now this dough was a tahor dough, the chazaka being tahor. But now this baby touched the dough, and while right? He took a piece from the dough. So while, yes, the majority of babies would be tameh and would be matame the dough, some would not be matame the dough. And that is why some would be tahor, some were not playing with dead cheretzes. And that is why Reb Meir says that the dough is tahor. Because you have the chazaka that the dough is tahor, plus the miut of babies that don't play around with dead cheretzes, versus the rove of babies that do play around with dead cheretzes. So a chazaka plus a miut against a rove, where it says Reb Meir in the Mishnah, that based on that, we would say that the chazaka plus the miut would be enough for us to determine that the dough remains tahor. We're going to get a little bit deeper into this in a second. Now, just about the chachamim for a second. What do the chachamim say? Well, the chachamim say that the fact of the matter is you have a rove versus a chazaka. That you have a rove. Babies are going to be playing around in the trash heaps. Some don't. So the rove defeats the chazaka. The rove defeats the miut. Right? Most babies would play around with dead cheretzes. Some don't. The sum is irrelevant because most do. So you basically have a rove against a chazaka and a rove against a chazaka. The rove is going to win. So according to the chacham, they say that it's a tamei dough. However, Reb Meir is choshesh l'miut. He says that the miut is important, and the fact that some babies don't play with dead cheretzes is important, and that joins together with the chazaka. And now the chazaka plus the rove is going to weaken. The chazaka plus the miut is going to weaken the rove. And that's why Reb Meir says that the dough is tahor. Smoch miut el chazaka join the miut of babies that don't play with dead mice and rats, and join that with the chazaka of the fact that the dough is initially tahor, the Israelite ruba, and that weakens the rove of babies that do mess with dead cheretzes and rats and stuff. And therefore, so what's the question? The question is, why is Reb Meir saying that the Shechita of a Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'in is nevela because most Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'ins have posel Shechitas? Should it not be enough for Reb Meir simply to say that some Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'ins have posel Shechitas? And the fact that even some Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'ins have posel Shechitas, that would join together with the chazaka of the animal being not kosher when it's alive because of Eber Min HaChai, plus the miut we're suggesting of Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'ins that the Shechita is posel, and that against the rove of Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'ins whose Shechita is kosher, we're suggesting would be enough for Meir to conclude that the Shechita is in fact nevela. To which the Gemara answers, the miut would not be enough. Im amru sofek tuma l'tayr, yomu sofek isur lahatir. Look, it's true. We have a Mishnah where Reb Meir says that when it comes to the dough that is tahor and the baby who plays with dead rats, it's true. Reb Meir said that we can assume that the dough remains tahor. That will go based on the chazaka and the miut. But why is that? There's a reason for that. The reason for that is because the way it works is that when you have a rove, as I mentioned earlier, a rove versus a chazaka, the rove is stronger than the chazaka. A rove versus a chazaka, the rove is stronger than a chazaka. However, a chazaka plus a miut versus a rove, it's equal. A chazaka plus a miut versus a rove, it's equal. Now, when it comes to Tumah and Tyra, there is a principle that when it comes to a davar she'ein bo das lishoel, when it's impossible to ask, such as this baby, you can't ask this baby, was he playing with rats or not? So because you have this essentially even split, because the chazaka plus the miut versus, on the one hand, versus the rove, we're saying is 50-50, and this baby is able das lishoel, we can't ask him about if he's tummy or Torah, he's a little baby. So when it comes to Tumah and Tahor, we can say that it is, in this case, Tahor. That principle does not apply, however, to Isser and Heter. That principle would not apply to the question of, is this meat nevela or not? Can we assume that the meat is nevela and be lenient, right? Because by saying that the meat is nevela, so then you don't have to be concerned for osav esbeno. You don't have to do Kisui Hadam. So Rav Huna and Rav Papa suggested that even if Reb Meir would simply say that a minority of Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'ins mess up their shchitas and do bad shchitas, that should be enough for us to say that it is nevela, because you have the chazaka of Ever Min Achai, plus the minority of Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'ins who mess up their shchita, versus the majority who do a kosher shchita. So that is, we're saying it's essentially an even split, right? A chazaka plus a minority versus a majority is essentially an even split. And because it's Isser V'Heter, it's not Tumah V'Tari, we don't have that principle of Ein Bodas Lishoel by the Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'in. And therefore, we're unable to be lenient. We're unable to say that, well, this is nevela, the shechita was no good, it's nevela, you don't have to do Kisui Hadam, you don't have to be concerned about osav esbeno. That wouldn't work. Therefore, Reb Meir had to say that it's because a rove of Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'ins do pasul shchitas. So now you have the chazaka of Ever Min Achai plus the rove of Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'ins who do pasul shchitas versus a miut of Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'ins that do kosher shchitas. We're not the chazaka plus the rove is going to overwhelm the miut of Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'ins that do kosher shchitas, and that is why Reb Meir says we can assume that the shchita of Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'ins is nevela, and therefore they get lashes, and therefore there's no concern about osav esbeno, and there's no concern about Kisui Hadam. Okay, Givaldik. So after all that, essentially where we arrive at, that's just to clarify, the shita of Reb Meir is that when it comes to the shchita of a Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'in, it's completely nevela. There's no concern for Kisui Hadam. There's no concern for osav esbeno. The Chachamim are nonetheless concerned. Okay, Givaldik. Therefore they say do Kisui Hadam out of Safek and do be concerned about osav esbeno out of Safek. If the Cheresh Shoteh v'Ka'in shechted the mother, they don't shech the daughter. Hora Rebbe Reb Meir, V'horik Rebbe Chachamim. Now, Rebbe paskin like both Reb Meir and the Chachamim at different points. So the question is, hey minav da'achrisa, which one was the latter shita? Because whatever he said last is probably the one that he holds like. Maybe change, right? Right? If he said one thing, but then said something else later on, probably holds like what he said later on. So Tashma coming here, Reb Abba Braid, Reb Chia bar Abba, Reb Abba the son of Reb Chia bar Abba, Reb Zera, Avukayim b'Shuka de Kesari. They were hanging out in the Shuk in Caesarea. A Pischa Devei Midrasha next to the entrance of the Beis HaMedrash. Apparently there was a Gevaldig, a Beis HaMedrash in the Shuk of Caesarea. Unbelievable. Nafak Reb Abi comes out of the Beis HaMedrash, Ashkochinu, and he finds Reb Zera and Reb Abi, the Reb Chia bar Abba. Amluni says to them, Lavamina Lechu, haven't I told you, Be'idan be Midrasha, that when there are people in the Beis HaMedrash, Lo Takimu Abrai, don't hang out outside, hang out inside the Beis HaMedrash. You know, you guys are big Talmidei Chachamim. Dilma Ika Inish, the Mitzdarka Le Shmaita. Maybe there's a person inside the Beis HaMedrash who, you know, it was Torah Shabbal Peh. You know, after Rebbe, they started writing down Torah Shabbal Peh, but I get the feeling that it took time to get to where we are now, where like mamish everything's written down on bookshelves and stuff, you know, in books on bookshelves. I get the impression that there was still very much a oral tradition back then, whatever it was, right? Because what does Rashi say? Rashi says, "Shemalote brura shmua laosim shebishnim laashiv lashoel." Right? That some of the people that are inside the Beis HaMedrash, what they're learning won't be so clear that if somebody then asks them what they learned in the Beis HaMedrash, that they'll be able to answer it. You would help them out. I get the impression there was like a shir going on, and maybe people didn't understand what was going on in the shir so much, and if people then would ask them, they wouldn't be able to answer properly. So therefore, Rav Ami says, you guys should really be hanging out in the Beis HaMedrash. That way, If there are people who need help, you're Talmidei Chacham, you'll be able to help them. But also the truth there, right? Because if they don't get the proper help, they can have the wrong understanding of the sugya. Reb Zera so Reb Zera was Makabel, he went into the Beis HaMedrash. Reb Babble didn't end up going into the Beis HaMedrash. Okay, so Reb Zera went into the Beis HaMedrash. Yazve became Babble, and they were asking, hey, minayu achrisa. They wanted to know, Rebbe had said that the halacha is like Reb Meir, but he had also said that the halacha is like the Chachamim. Which one did he say later? Amru Reb Zera says, darn. Lo shvaktu li the shayle lisava chaval. I wish that I would be here with Reb Abba Reb Chia bar Abba, that we can ask him Dilma Shmiele me'avua, because maybe he had heard something about this from his father Reb Chia bar Abba v'avua minei. The Reb Yochanan, Reb Chia bar Abba, of course, was a student of Reb Yochanan. The Reb Chia bar Abba called Tlosin Yomin Kamahadu Talmudei Kam Reb Yochanan Gemara from Masechta Brachis. Daf Chof Ches, the second day in a row that we were quoting Mamish from our first. This is Daf Lamed Ches. This was already slightly more, about 5 weeks into Babble on Talmud. We learned that Reb Chia bar Abba every 30 days would go over to Chazara on all of his learning in front of Reb Yochanan. So Reb Zera says, Chaval, we could have asked Reb Abba if he heard from his father Reb Chia bar Abba, if Reb Yochanan had said anything about Rebbe Shechita. So what do we do? What do we pass by Shechita Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen? Is it chayavin? Kisui Hadam, is it chayavin? Osav Ezbino. Tashma Deshalach, Kamir Deshalach Reb Elazar Legola, that Reb Elazar sent to the Golis, probably to Babble, I don't know, someplace. Horror Rebbe Reb Meir, that Rebbe paskin like Reb Meir, that you don't have to be concerned, that it's Nevela. V'akrabanon Nami Ori, but didn't Rebbe also paskin like the Rabbanon? Lav Shmamina, from the fact that Reb Elazar didn't mention anything about the Rabbanon Shita, rather he just said that Rebbe also like Reb Meir, Shmamina ha da'achrisa Shmamina. Clearly, Rebbe ultimately said that the latter Shita was that he holds like Reb Meir, that the Shechita v'Cheresh Shoteh v'Kohen is nevela, and there's no concern for osav espino, and there's no concern for Kisui Hadam. And now we get up to a new Mishnah about shechting multiple chayas and oafs at once. The Mishnah says, Shachat mea chayas b'makom echad, that if a person shechted 100 chayas in one place, Kisui echad l'chulan, one Kisui Hadam works, to Kisui Hadam once for all of them. Mea oafs b'makom echad, 100 birds in one place, Kisui echad l'chulan, one Kisui Hadam for all 100 birds. Chaya v'oaf b'makom echad, a chaya and an oaf in one place, Kisui echad chulan, one Kisui Hadam for the both of them. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, shachat chaya yichasena v'achar kach yishchot es ha'of. If you're shechting a chaya and an oaf, shech the chaya first, do Kisui Hadam on the chaya, and then you will shecht the oaf. Tana Rabbanan, says the Gemara that the rabbis teach, chaya, when the pasuk says chaya, kol mashma chaya ben ruba ben mu'etes. Chaya means however many chayas it is, whether a lot, whether a little. Oaf, kol mashma oaf ben ruba ben mu'at, whether we're talking about a lot of oafs, a lot of birds, or whether a little birds. Mikaram from here they said shachad mea chayas makom echad Kisui echad l'chulan, that if you shecht 100 chayas in one place, it's one Kisui Hadam for all 100. Mea ofis b'makom echad, 100 birds in one place, Kisui echad l'chulan, one Kisui Hadam for all 100. Chaya v'of b'makom echad, a chaya and an oaf in one place, Kisui echad l'chulan, one Kisui Hadam for both of them. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, shachat chaya yichasena, v'achar kach yishchot es ha'of. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, first you shecht and do Kisui Hadam for the chaya, afterwards you get to the shechita for the oaf. Shenemar, the pasuk says, chaya o oaf. That the word o splits between chaya and oaf to say, do with one and then get to the other. To first do the Kisui Hadam and then for the chaya and then for the oaf. And then you go on and check the oaf. Amru lo Hare hu omer ki nefesh kol basar b'damo b'nafshu. To which the Chacham replied to Rabbi Yehuda, and they say, but the pasuk says ki nefesh kol basar damo b'nafshu. Maika mahadre le. What are the Chacham saying to Rabbi Yehuda about ki nefesh kol basar damo b'nafshu? This is what the Rabbanan, this is what the Rabbi is saying to Rabbi Yehuda. Hi o mibayle lechalik. So Rabbi Yehuda says that when it says chaya o of, it means first shech the chaya to the Kisui Hadam for the chaya, and then shech the of. The Chacham say that's not what o is for. O is lechalik, to say that even if you're only chayva, even if you're only shechting a chaya or only shechting an of, there's Kisui Hadam. Otherwise, I may have thought if you said chaya va'of that you would have to only do Kisui Hadam if you shecht a chaya and an of. There was this chaya o of to say even if it's just the chaya or just an of, there's Kisui Hadam. Rabbi Yehuda lechalik midamu nafka. Rabbi Yehuda says, the pasuk says v'shafach is damo b'chiso b'ofer. Damo is singular, even if it's just a chaya or just an of. V'abanan damo tuva mashma dichsiv ki nefesh kol basar damo b'nafshehu. The Rabbi say, nah, don't be fooled by damo, which sounds singular, but it can actually refer to plural. For example, ki nefesh kol basar damo b'nafshehu. That when it says damo, it's referring, I assume that's the point, it's referring to kol basar, to more than just one, I guess, animal. And therefore, damo could be still referring to chaya and of, whereas Rabbi Yehuda says that he understands damo to be referring to even just the chaya or and of. Amar b'chanina, says Rabbi Chanina, moda hay Rabbi Yehuda. That Rabbi Yehuda would nonetheless be moda le'inan broche, when it comes to a broche, she'eino mevarech ela brocha achas. However, even though Rabbi Yehuda says you first shech the chaya, do Kisui Hadam for the chaya, and then shech the of, you don't make a new bracha on the shechita of the of. You don't make a new bracha on the shechita of the of, even though you did the Kisui Hadam in between. Once again, why is this different than the students of Rab? To have grown up, Rav Chananel Tamida the Rab, Rav Yasvi b'Suda. Rav Bonan and Rav Chananel, they were sitting and eating a Suda. Koy Malai Rav Yeva Sava, and Rav Yeva Sava was waiting upon them, and in the Suda, he was taking care of them. Amrulay, and they said to him, Hav livrich, okay, give us some wine so we could bench. Hadur Amru lay Hav lishte, and then they said, you know what? Actually, give us some wine, but not to bench. We just want to drink wine. Amru Rav Yeva Sava. Rav Yeva Sava says to them, Hachi Amar Rav, that this is what Rav says. Came to Amar Rav livrich itzer lay limishte chamra. That once a person says, okay, I want to bench, well then they have taken their mind off of the Suda. And once they've taken their mind off the Suda, if they're going to want to drink more wine, they're going to have to make a new bracha on it. So why, when it comes to Suda, are we saying that once you say it's time to bench, if you want more wine, you're going to have to make a new bracha on the wine? And why, when you shecht a chaya and then you do Kisui Hadam, you don't need to make a new bracha on the when you then go back to Shechita for the oaf? Why is that? We should say, once you go and stop doing Shechita and instead you're doing Kisui Hadam, you should have to make a new bracha on the Shechita when you go back to Shechita. Here's the difference. When it comes to the Suda, Mishta uvruche badedadilo efshir. Look, once you say, I want to bench, and you take your mind off the Suda by saying, I want to bench, you're saying that you want to bench, you want to do something that is impossible to be done at the same time as you're drinking. You're saying, I don't want to be drinking anymore, I want to be benching right now. I want to be benching, and while I'm benching, you can't be drinking and benching at the same time. So because he's saying, I want to stop what I'm doing to do something that is mutually exclusive, so if I want to change my mind and go back to eating, I'm going to have to make a new bracha. Again, also mishta uvruche, drinking and making a bracha, benching at the same time. Lo efshir, you can't. Hacha efshir the shachit b'chado or mechase b'chado. But over here, technically speaking, probably difficult to do, but you don't. I mean, shechting and kisui Hadam are not mutually exclusive. You're shechting, and then you go to do kisui Hadam, which technically you could do. You could do kisui Hadam with one hand and shecht with the other hand. Technically speaking, it'd probably be hard to do, but they aren't by definition mutually exclusive. Mashiach, you can't be drinking while you're making a bracha achrona. That's drinking is while you're still eating. Bracha achrona is when you're done eating. So once you say I'm done, I want to make a bracha achrona, an activity that you will be unable to do while eating. So then, if you change your mind to start eating again, you have to make a new bracha rishona. However, when it comes to Shechita and Kisui Hadam, you don't need to make a new bracha on the Shechita when you did Kisui Hadam in the middle. Chevre, that was Daf Pei Vav of Masechta Chullin. The first part of Daf Pei Vav, we learned about the machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chachamim with regard to the Shechita of a Cheresh, Shoteh v'Kain. Reb Meir says nothing to be concerned about. It is nevela, therefore there's no Kisui Hadam, therefore there is no oafs, no concerns, nothing. The Chacham say we do need to be concerned about Kisui Hadam. You should do Kisui Hadam at a suffix, and we do need to be concerned about oafs, and if the Cheresh Shoteh v'Kain shecht the mother, don't go ahead and shecht the daughter. We then got into a whole interesting question about chazaka and rov and miut plus chazaka versus rov, and how that works out by tumentara versus isveter, like eating meat. And then we got to a new Mishnah where we talked about shechting multiple chayas or multiple oafs at once. We said that shechting multiple chayas, you only have to do one kisui. Multiple oafs, you only have to do one Kisui Hadam. We also said that if you shecht a chaya and then an oaf, you could do Kisui Hadam at the end of it. Reb Yehuda disagreed there and said that you have to first do Kisui Hadam for the chaya before you move on to shecht the oaf. We did see an interesting shita there, though, that even according to Reb Yehuda, however, you would not need to make a new bracha on the shechita of the oaf, because when you went to do the Kisui Hadam, it's not considered like you went to do something else that was like a distraction from the Shechita, because after all, the Kisui Hadam is something that you could be doing at the same time as you're doing the Shechita, which makes it different than, for example, if you say, okay, we're going to bench now, and then you change your mind to eat more, you have to make a bracha once if you want to continue eating more, because eating is something that is sort of neged, is against. You can't be eating and benching at the same time. So you said you changed your mind to do something that is mutually exclusive to eating. Therefore, if you want to continue eating, you have to make a new bracha. Friends, that was Daf Pei Vav, Daf 86 of Masechta Chullin. Hope you enjoy. Have a great day. Cheers.